An Occult Hunter's Deathlog, Part 3, written by TheForestHasEyes. This is Nolan signing back on. I'm sorry for the pause. Things have been getting, well, a little hectic, as it were. I'll try to cover it when I can, but for now, actions are still taking place. So, in the interim, it's time for another trip down memory lane. This time to Louisiana. I want to say that this was well into my second year with Pexu, nearing the 3-year mark. Time gets a little convoluted as a government-sponsored disposable, with dozens of missions a month. Target packages that the world can never see, beginning to pile up in the back of my house, figuratively, and in my mind, literally, as the weight of everything began to settle and press down onto my shoulders and my soul. I can't tell you the amount of early mornings or late nights running off adrenaline and caffeine, marching off to every corner of the states and the globe. 1 week in South Korea, the next to Canada to deal with something that came from northern Michigan. The next, well, let's just say that something was lurking within the smoke of a large forest fire and harvesting all those who ventured in to stop the flames. Honestly, I think I was going insane. To be fair, I probably am, though functionally at the very least. Worst was every time that I came home, it was a feeling less and less safe. A good example was when I woke up one morning and decided to make myself a cup of coffee. Honestly, that was probably what did it. A bad omen. Anyways, it was heading into the fall of that year, so I could feel the cold of the Rockies seeping through the windows. I went out to take a look on my porch, and I saw them. Birds. Now, I live in an extremely rural area. With some of the installations I made on my house, I'm practically off the grid. Animals are to be expected, but not the nearly 200 dead birds I saw lying around the front of my house. All of them had their backs to the soil, their eyes wide and to the sky. Their wings and legs curled up like a wave of death had hit them. I nearly dropped my coffee and backed in, holding my breath as the first thing that came to mind was some sort of pathogen and chemical agent. The Blackwood Brotherhood targeting Pexu operatives on their home turf, though minimal, was not uncommon. The unit sent some people out, and analysis showed that there wasn't any sensible cause of death. Legitimately, it was like they just stopped, dropped, and died from what the shrink said. Is shrink the right word? Maybe lab tech. Well, whatever, they're deep into animal science and forensics and... I'm just rambling. The point is, it was nearly impossible to see that they were dead until necrosis set in. What's worse, I don't think that it's a cult. Like I said in a previous entry, things have been weird around here. More handprints have been appearing around my property. Approximately 250 meters from my house is a wood line across a field. On an old oak that's got more rings than most countries have decades on this earth was another handprint. This one was gaunt. Elongated fingers that burned a good centimeter into the tree. Another one similarly appeared on my gutters, like someone had attempted to climb it, though further inspection of the roof showed no more. I know what this was. It's the same thing that the Mooj and Taliban did, sizing us up, probing for weaknesses. I went back inside and I kept my rifle loaded. I wasn't going to blink first. I was almost overjoyed when I got the call from Montgomery about my next op, although I didn't know the madhouse that I was walking into. You see, The things that we're largely in combat with can't always just be shot. They are incomprehensible and primordial. And while we were regularly in the trenches against situation whiskies, terrors in Appalachia, and fighting a conspiracy, well, sometimes we're up against things that warp the world itself. Dossier, Louisiana Umbra. Where do I begin with this one? Well, in short, I was being assigned to an area deep in central Louisiana, rich in voodoo and black magic. So much so that the place is stained, and plenty of occult experts would tell you that you don't mess around there. Now, I wasn't just effing around. I was being told to rappel down and start kicking. Ever since Katrina, there's a large amount of backroads areas in Louisiana that just haven't recovered. Infrastructure and basic necessities are constantly faltering. The quality of life is lower than some third world countries. It's bad, and the town in question was more or less forgotten about. The town's population had been decreasing ever since reports of loved ones returning and wandering the streets started to occur. At first, it was a handful. Then, entire houses started turning up empty. The local police station was so undermanned, underfunded, under everything, that they were neglected. All signs pointed to something. Something had been harvesting these people. In an area where the veil between our realm and the other side thinned, something had crawled its way onto our side, and it got passed to Peckshu, who then assigned it to me. Terrific. Worst part was that it was in Montgomery's own words. I wish we could provide you with more, but we're down on manpower and can't confirm what the nature of the situation is. We'll have you on ISR every second. Call me if you need me. I can't say that I was all too pleased to be going to a backroad swamp town nestled in a black magic alley that was slowly being devoured by something. I can also say that I had to front my own transportation on this one, meaning that it was a crispy 20-hour drive. What I will say is that it gave me plenty of time to think about everything. My mind drifted back to the events that led me here, my time in the 10th Mountain, and the 4 deployments from hell. I think it was while passing through Oklahoma that I saw something that shook me to my core. It was this out in the literal middle of flatlands nowhere, past a native res, just a few clicks. I'm buying some fuel for the road when the cashier hands me back my change. A gold wristband with the logo of The New Advent was written on it. I can tell you I sped out of there. This guy had to have not left his zip code for the last 20 years. This place barely had a power line, and yet he was wearing that wristband. So many people were. I saw a few at the airport when I flew out to Korea, Canada, even Germany. A pit in my stomach grew. The world we knew was slowly being consumed by something. Time was running out, and I feared that the brass didn't have the manpower to stop it. I still don't, and I was right. Things got real weird when I passed the state border into Louisiana. I was groggy and tired, so I pulled into a rest stop and I caught some winks. The dream I had was, like I said, weird. It was like vividly weird. I remember feeling in the dream of tasting stuff. The cold of my AC back at my house, my sheets, the disgusting taste in my mouth. I woke up in my own bed. Actually, I was sure the entire drive was the dream, a hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation. It was so real, so much so, that when I glanced around, I felt the world come back. I remember rubbing my temples before I heard it. "Dwight," a female voice said. Someone I remember. She was an old friend of mine, a colleague who helped me before I joined PECSU. Roseanne. I couldn't mistake her British accent anywhere, and her voice sounded real. The echo down the hall. I looked at the closed door, unable to talk. My lips wouldn't move. I tried to get up, but I couldn't. "Dwight," she said again, no inflection in her voice. The warning signs in my head were tripping as the doors just pushed open. There she was, tan skin, dark hair falling over a face framing a set of wide eyes with needle-thin irises. I could feel my entire body panic as she sprinted towards me, eyes as gold as the new Advent's banner, face contorted into pure hatred. I snapped away so hard in the driver's seat of my RAV4 that my chest hit the steering wheel, causing me to cringe. I came awake swearing. Caffeine nightmares are a trip. Though, honestly, I don't know. You ever forget someone's voice till you hear it again? So much has happened. I had forgotten Roseanne's tone until I heard it there. I hadn't thought about it in literally years, and something had drawn those memories back out. I looked at the clock. A hearty 30 minutes had elapsed since I went to sleep. Good enough, I suppose. I got back out onto the road. I pulled into the target area several hours later. As I did, it let me know what I was getting into. Dense forest that were still cold and humid from the previous storms surrounded either side of the interstate like an impermeable wall. All along the road, there were overgrown shacks, rusted-out cars, abandoned vehicles, some turned over. Road signs were hanging off of wood poles that pointed towards roads that had long since been abandoned. Yep, this was central Louisiana, all right. The town in question had seen better days, and that was at least somewhat alarming, as it had been a while since the epicenter hit this place, and yet, power lines were still sheared and hanging. There were no sparks, which meant they were dead. Windows were broken, entire sections of houses had walls falling off. People still walked the street, off in the distance before disappearing behind corners. It was broad daylight, and yet it seemed as dead as it would be in the pitch dark. You could almost see the slight dark mist hanging over it, a weird flicker at the edge of your eye. This wasn't inhabited by us anymore. Something else had made its lair here. The first point of contact was the local police station. And well, yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. I didn't even think that it was the actual police station. It was a small 10 by 10 meter concrete square building on the corner bordering a small lot full of gravel, rocks, and debris. Old bars had rusted over the smeared windows. The literal word police was painted above the door and had begun chipping off long ago. I pulled up to the curb, opening my door to get a blast of the wet cold. There was a hint of mildew and old rot in the air as I walked up to the place. The old patrol vehicle had cracked windows with almost all of the tires flat and empty. Approaching the door, a single sign read, "Until further notice, all law enforcement responsibilities are to be directed to the Louisiana State Police Troop." There was supposed to be someone here, at least that's what I had been given. I checked my info again and I saw the code 0432. I scanned around and sure enough, I found a small lockbox hidden behind a bucket that I kicked away, causing it to roll down the sidewalk with a large echo. Inside, there was a set of keys and a laminated sheet with a set of addresses. And written on the bottom, "Good luck." Gee, thanks. The first few addresses were situated in the center of town, something that I thought would give me comfort, but I soon realized the extent of the harvest that had been conducted. Cars were either gone or abandoned. Some were parked half on the curb, others were rotting in their driveways. Bushes and shrubs were overgrown. Sidewalks had to be more weeds than, well, sidewalk. This place had become a borderline project left to decay, the swamps having reclaimed it as humanity had been driven out by something. I parked along the road, stepped out, and concealed my Glock. Though, if I needed it, a short, quick, violent run back to my ROB-4 would provide me with heavier firepower. The keys provided were to select addresses. Although I'm sure had the cops still been around, they might as well have given me the master key to the neighborhood and let me start looking. Regardless, I walked up to one of the single-floor houses, placing the key in, and the lock wouldn't give. Too much rust. A single mule kick to the door, and a few more months off my knees, and I was in. The smell of mildew hit me immediately, nearly suffocating me. Dead air is lethal, so I brought along a simple rebreather to keep my lungs clear. The windows had been broken open, like on many of the houses, exposing the insides to the element, and yet there were signs that whomever had been here had vanished. Sure, things were kicked around by either animals or the wind and rain, but the table was set up for dinner that had long since rotted and fused to the plates. Toys were still on the floor. A lounge chair was kicked up with the remote on the seat. There were imprints of people burned into the chairs, onto the table, in the lazy boy. I've got a stomach for many things. Trudging through sewers with a pistol and a light looking for beast? Yeah, that's fine. Even if it does burn away my sense of smell. The sound of a shot impacting a target, the screams, the blood. I'm infantry. I'm desensitized to all of that. Scraping a person off of a swamp-drenched seat knowing that they used to be a man, woman, or child? I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't too prepared for that. But I guess that I've hit a new milestone. Placing it into a collection bag, I left the house and locked the door behind me. I'm not sure why. I placed a bit of the collected matter into the analyzer I had been provided. The readout read dried flesh and sulfur. It was like this for several blocks. House after house, the same thing. Old homes turned into ruins, streets deserted. It felt more like a post-apocalypse than a silent one, but here I was rummaging through the aftermath like a scavenger. It was around the third house that I left, with no signs beyond silhouette imprints and rank smells, when a shuffling in the grass caused me to turn around on a dime, my hand sliding to my pistol grip, only to see a dog. It was a Belgian Malinois. I know because I've worked with them a lot as military working dogs, both in training and overseas. German Shepherds are terrifying, but they've got nothing on the absolute man-killer that are these things. Gray and black fur, built like a truck, yet its coat was messy and unkempt. It seemed hesitant, wary of me as I looked at it. I had an idea. An old bag of jerky I had seemed to bridge the gap, and I took a few minutes picking barbs and twigs out of its fur. An old worn red collar showed that he'd been wandering the streets by himself for a while. The name read Zeus, from the Hartwell family. My eyes turned to the house that I had just exited. On a mailbox beside the door, written in faded, worn letters, some of which were missing, I could make out Hartwell. "Well," I said, scratching behind the beast's ear. By now, his spirits had picked up. "You want to ride along with me for a bit?" I was going to place down a towel for the Mao, as Zeus was still soaked with the outside swamp water, and he probably had ticks, but at this point, I had been wandering through mildew-infested houses, tracking stolen souls for hours, and I had just about had enough. We pulled up to another house, more towards the southern edge of the town. As we did, Zeus started to growl. In hindsight, the capability a canine brings in terms of identifying threats that I can't is something that I should have invested in earlier. The key words in that sentence are, "in hindsight." I took a step out of the vehicle, not wanting to drag the poor dog into a plaster and wood mausoleum. I approached the house, which was just as unkempt as the others, placing the key into the door. It was pulled right open, causing me to stagger. The person on the other end was a woman. Long blonde hair, hazel eyes, probably mid-20s. She raised an eyebrow and, in a southern Cajun drawl, asked, "Can I help you, sir?" I was a bit flabbergasted, looking around to the dead neighborhood and then back to her. I didn't have a response because, to be honest, I had been sent under the pretense that the homes I was searching were empty. This one was not. I stammered a bit. She seemed annoyed, then smiled. "You're from the government, aren't you?" I scratched the back of my head. Yes, ma'am." She invited me in. I did my best to dry my boots off, as the house was far more maintained on the inside. I noted this, saying the storms must have done a number to the town. She chuckled and didn't look back. "That's life here, mister. So tell me, what are you looking for exactly?" she asked. I took a look around, observing the inside of her house. Reconnaissance so far, just trying to gauge what's going on. More than a gas leak, but to explain quickly, a gas leak is one of the official terms that we used to play off events, preventing mass hysteria. It's also good to draw out and see if someone knows more than they're letting on. She seemingly did. "Gas leaks ain't the cause of those screams, honey," she said. I raised an eyebrow, turning back to her. "Screams?" I questioned. She nodded, standing by the sink in the kitchen, washing her dishes. "It got the neighbors a few nights ago. Heard them and their little baby crying out. Then the ones adjacent. Some down the block. Like fireflies slowly going out, though you can hear every decibel." Her tone was cheerfully gleeful describing this. I raised an eyebrow, my hand sliding under my jacket. "Did you reach out to anyone?" I asked. She shrugged, and I could see the flicker of a smile. "Things don't work like they do in Chicago, Dwight. Sometimes it's best to look the other way and just keep going. If you survive, well, it just wasn't your day." That's when I noticed that the water she was using to wash the dishes was black, corrosive, and dirty, borderline septic. The counter was also far more chipped and cracked than it had been. The walls were peeling, the carpet was mangled, and then it hit me as my eyes locked on her and my hand gripped my pistol. "How do you know my name?" She turned, hair greasy and hanging over her face as her expression was blank. Her eyes were normal, but something behind them, an intention that was malicious, evil. Her lips peeled back to reveal sharpened and worn-down teeth as she screamed, pushing the limits of her vocal cords as she lunged. I drew my Glock, and Then I was back in my driver's seat. My barrel clanged on the windshield as I found myself aiming over the steering wheel. I glanced at the clock. It hadn't changed from when I had left the car to go investigate the house. What had happened? How had I gotten back to the car? What had happened to the time in the house? I looked out. I noticed that the car door was slightly ajar and that my foot was sticking out of it. Zeus had begun to bark like a maniac. At first, I thought he was barking at me, and then I saw that he was staring out the passenger window at the house. I looked. I couldn't see anything through the smeared windows, but I could tell that it was still in there. This was a warning: get out or become a statistic. I wasn't going to back down, but I needed more information. I drove back out of the town. I decided to take 5 in a parking lot of an old restaurant, a burger joint that I had passed on the way in. One of the few buildings before getting to town that still seemed to be occupied. It was open. It was probably the only one left. So there I sat. Zeus was gnawing away at a burger that I had gotten him. I couldn't eat right now, nor was it ever good to have a full stomach. I would learn later that this would be the right decision. My radio was hooked up to the wave relay mount on the back of my RAV4 so that I could reach Peckshoe, Maine. Montgomery and I spoke as I half sat out the door.
You're saying that it can manipulate reality.
The Brit spoke. I rubbed my temples, keying into the mic. I'm saying that one minute I was in the house, about to be jumped, and the next I had gotten rewound 10 minutes back. A moment of silence passed as he responded.
Check your ATAC. I've updated you with contact information and a location for someone nearby who can help you. Originally, we were going to have you meet later, but we're pushing the timeline forward. This is growing out of control.
If you had asked me, I would have said that it was already out of control. But I just replied, copy, November 1 out. The contact was... Okay, so you remember how I said that Haitian voodoo and black magic was big in Louisiana? Especially around New Orleans? It was just my luck, or more his experience, that made him one of the last people still in town, alongside the burger joint worker. Maybe the gas station rep, but certainly not the landscapers. His hideout was one of those under the convenience store stairwell type spots, a small window with an LED sign that read, Jacques, the Bone Lord. I looked back to my ATAC reader. The address pointed to here, coordinates and all. The name was Jacques Delorme. I swore that if Montgomery just fed me to some organ harvester... As I was thinking this, the door opened and I saw a man. He was in his late 60s and was peeking through the crack in the door. He was wearing a leather coat and jeans. A set of blue lens glasses concealed his tired eyes. He looked at me, and then Zeus, and then back at me. No animals, he said. I shook my head. I'm not leaving him in the car. We already paid you. He paused for a moment, and there was a tense stare that was finally interrupted by the closing of the door and the sounds of several dozens of locks being undone as he finally opened it up fully. The dog stays on the corner mat. You go to the table, Jacques muttered. Where do I even begin with this place? Well, he wasn't called the Bone Lord for nothing. Skeleton parts seemed to line or decorate every piece of furniture, furnishing, and even make up a few shelves as the smell of incense in the dimly lit shop surrounded us. I leaned forward on the old round table, taking note of all the calcified artifacts. These aren't real skeletons around us, right? I asked. Jacques sat back in his chair. Does it matter? I guess not, I said. I slid the sample I had taken from the first house, with the printout of the details, onto the table. You journeyed into those homes, he asked, realizing the situation with a surprised raise of the eyebrow. Yeah, I said, puzzled, though I should have been wiser to what he was meaning. Jacques flipped up his glasses lens and looked to me. I never ventured that far. Every time I tried to cross to see what had made this place taboo, it felt like a hand was clenching my throat, he said, gesturing towards his neck as he continued. It was suffocating. I've been trapped here since. This place is no stranger to rifts, but something must have crawled out of one. Something, I asked, confused. Jacques shook his head. I have been looking into this since I could barely walk, and even then, I will never know even 1% of the other side. Imagine a microbe attempting to learn about humanity. That is the depth we face now, Nolan Dwight. So, I said, leaning back. What, we've got no idea of what this is or how to stop it? Jacques waved off the defeatist take and pulled out a map. If I were to guess, an umbra. A what? I asked. A leech. Someone attempted to contact the other side, and it latched on and pulled them in. It used them as a line to cross through. Now it is free, and it is growing fat on all those who surround it. Jacques then laid out a map of the area and drew a circle showing the extent, having now crossed out far past the borders of the town. Did you experience any more of these warps? The not real parts of time? He asked. Yeah, once when I was crossing in from Oklahoma, I said, remembering the rest stop. He paused with a long swallow. We need to seal it away. I know where. I raised an eyebrow. He pointed to an old complex just to the northeast of the town. An old warehouse previously used for lumber to carve into the swamp. You know, the Trail of Tears, he asked. I was confused, but I nodded. One of the old routes ran through here. Many were sick or wounded and left to die. Others, later slaves, buried in the same cemetery. A whole lot of death. Only wooden markers denoting their resting spots. Now paved over and forgotten. Even that laid abandoned. His retelling had his words grow more and more pained as he finished. So, what, all of the deaths? I said, putting the little pieces together. He laid it all out. They must have attracted something. I hear them every night, Nolan Dwight. Old generations and new, begging to be set free. I thought that I was going crazy. They were ghosts, but you saw the aftermath. We need to end this, please. He was trapped here. He was unable to leave as the threshold had surrounded his entire house. I wasn't tied to the other side like him. There weren't any leashes to drag me down, and it had already showed that it was somewhat afraid of me. If this Umbra was feasting off of all of these people like they were batteries, I was going to have to go in there and undo it all. The route took me to a drop off the side of an interstate heading north from the town. I popped open the trunk and retrieved the essentials, pulling my plate carrier over my jacket, putting on my belt, and I clipped the leg strap of my holster. The final touches were checking the light on my rifle and slamming the trunk shut. I stopped when I looked to the passenger seat. Zeus was barking, scratching at the door. Practicality said to leave him where it was safe. However, part of me didn't want to leave him here, and another wagered that, in some respect, he knew what was down that muddy and gravel-filled drop into the woods, and he wanted some payback of his own. I opened the car door and the Mal took off, forcing me to hoof it down to catch up. "Zeus! Zeus!" I called out, causing him to stop at the bottom as he stood firm, ears up, looking around. I stopped behind him as he hugged one of my legs, my rifle pointed into the brush. From the trees, they were looking at us. The disheveled, haunting forms of people just behind the bark bodies of the forest, just staring at us. They looked almost normal, but not quite. Some parts of them were blurred. Other parts, I swore, were intact. But they were decayed. They were both dead and alive, stuck perpetually in whatever this weaponized hell for them was. My optics red reticule traced over them all, surrounding us as I took stock. They were sizing us up. We weren't relenting. The air grew stale, and the only sound to greet us was the sound of rain dropping off the trees. Then, one of them took off. My rifle took aim as I shouted, "Stop! Stop!" Though it was more of me trying to do my part as I fired. The round tore through them, and the thrall melted into the same decayed slop as before. Then, all of them began to converge, sets of 2 or 3 shots as I switched from target to target. Zeus jumped onto one, a larger man, sinking his teeth into the neck. He started tearing it apart before it too melted into the same state. My rifle ran dry, forcing me to draw my pistol. A couple of them reached out, silent screams as their jaws were wide open. With one slick motion, my barrel was level and a set of rounds cracked off, and the nearby area was cleared empty. We had to move. Zeus and I took off down the trail, still being chased as I took aim, firing shots standing, braced against the tree, giving us some breathing room before we finally reached a clearing. I staggered out, Zeus sniffing the air as he growled. I messily reloaded a new magazine, the old one hitting the forest floor as I slapped the bolt release home and aimed my rifle. The forest was quiet now. The only sign of anything besides my firing on the trail was the hissing line of decay marks burning into the forest floor. I muttered to myself as I topped off my Glock, looking down at the Malinois before I quipped, "I gotta get a new career," to Zeus. The dog simply looked up, none the wiser to what I was saying. Yeah, you're right. I should just shut up. I turned back to our target, a gigantic skeleton of rusted metal supports and sheet wall. It stood just above the trees in a dense forest with cracked concrete and stones surrounding it. The warehouse. My rifle was raised as I approached, Zeus having taken up some sort of revolving circle around me as I made for one of the closer entrances. Moss and leaves hung above through the cracks as water kept pouring down. A gigantic, cracked concrete foundation floor with an empty shell of a building surrounding it. The old structure groaned and cried out as I looked up and around. Seemingly nothing was there to greet us. Zeus, however, was too busy sniffing the floor, digging at the concrete as I turned, asking, "What, you smell something?" Jacques did say that it was built over a mass grave. The only question was, how do I get through several feet of old concrete? I lowered my rifle and measured my options, opening the phone mount on my carrier to switch open ATAC and see what assets I had available. Though I didn't like the idea of sitting there for several hours waiting for a cutter or... What you're looking for isn't here, Dwight. I was drawn out of my planning by a voice from behind. One that I knew very well, though it didn't click when I heard it, as instincts took over and I turned and aimed my rifle. But what I saw? An old soldier and a friend, wearing dirty, outdated UCP digital fatigues. He stepped out from behind an old factory machine, still the same, like the last time I saw him, over a decade and a half prior. High and tight brown haircut, square jaw, shorter, stockier guy. His name tape read Clancy. What the F? I asked, my barrel lowering out of shock. There he was in tan boots, a slight smile on his face, just like I remembered. As he took a step forward, my senses came back to me, as did Zeus's rabid growling and barking. Clancy's face contorted to that of hatred and rage. That was enough to sober me up as I took aim at him. Clancy didn't like that. Dwight, what are you doing? I shook my head. You didn't make it out of Kandahar. I don't know what this is, but I'm not going to let you disgrace my friend like this. It took another step forward. My thumb flipped my rifle to semi. The single sound caused it to pause. I gave you a chance, Nolan. I shook my head. Don't do this. Let him walk away and come face me yourself. A moment of silence passed. I took a single shaky breath, and then I fired. The firing pin hit the primer, and the barrel sung, and a round shot out. And he was gone. I was looking dead at him, and then he was just gone. There wasn't a pile of decayed mess underneath. His body wasn't there, just another effing illusion. Zeus ran forward, barking loud as I heard a single crack, then another. Then the concrete gave out, crumbled. My stomach shot up into my throat as I went into a total freefall. The light above me grew more and more dim before I hit the ground hard. A combination of rocks and dirt made me glad that I wore side plates as I did what I could to brace myself. Zeus's barking from above pulled me slowly out of my shock as I staggered to my knees. I grabbed my rifle and turned on the light. I soon realized that the sound that I was hearing wasn't water falling, but melting. They were all there. Hundreds fused and melted together in some hideous form of old, decaying flesh. 1,000 eyes and 100 mouths, all crying out of a grotesque form with several limbs, all around a central mass that stood in the darkness. There it was, the Umbra. "You've got to be kidding me," was the last thing I remember saying before staggering back fast enough to avoid it as it lunged forward. One of its limbs had a dozen skeletal rotten hands grabbing out, clutching and scratching at the dirt as the sound of flesh falling off of their bones made contact with the stone. The noise filled my ears. I flicked my rifle onto auto, firing off a burst into it, Flesh and meat tore from its central body as all of them screamed loud enough to pierce my eardrums. Thank God for the ComTac headset. Then, it moved faster than it ever should have. I leapt to get out of the way. However, one of the side limbs used its thousands of hands to grab onto the back of my plate carrier, dragging me towards it. The sensation of a dozen indentured trapped lives being used to try and tear me apart made my spine crawl right out of my body. I fought to move forward. Then I got dragged as they all started to tear at my jacket and kit. Still, I fired into it, tearing off parts of the arm and body as I stomped fingers and palms, causing them to melt off as pods of rotten flesh. From above, I heard Zeus's barks getting louder. Remember when I said that Malinois were crazy? I wasn't kidding. Those canines will leap through reinforced glass or smash through a fence to get to their target. I guess that Zeus had de facto adopted me as his partner, or designated it the enemy, because he leapt on top of it and began to tear at its body. Oh boy, did he tear. Skin flew as it writhed. I muzzle thumped my barrel into its body and fired. It retreated back so fast that Zeus fell off and onto the floor. Although it did little to stop the dog, as he's proven that he's built durable. It attempted to flee. I looked around at the mud and old concrete piled around us in this strange lair. It retreated further. Zeus barked, not backing down. "Get back here!" I shouted. I took off after it, flicked my rifle's magazine out, and slapped in a new one. Zeus was not far behind as I aimed my light and took shots at the form as it fell apart. The voices started to get fainter. I didn't know if that meant that it was getting further away or if we were cutting off more parts of it. Suddenly, we were bathed in darkness, and I fell through a door. I mean, a literal door, onto a carpet. I was back in one of the houses. I shot to my feet, seeing the layout of one of the homes that I had cleared earlier. I looked around. Surrounding me as they sat on the couches, the chairs, at the table, were those taken. I remember this house exactly as they were, right where I analyzed their places. It was keeping them here, trapped. It wasn't going to trap me. I sprinted forwards towards the back door. Zeus was nowhere to be seen as they took off after me. I kicked open the back door and jumped through. This time I was in where I wagered the police station was. The small square gray building had maybe 2 cells on the inside in stereotypical barred caged setups. 2 officers in the dark blue uniforms of local Louisiana cops sat at their desks. I fired at one, only doing so because I knew this wasn't real. Full disclosure, I don't just shoot cops on sight, you know. As they dropped, they melted through the desk, corroding it, causing it to collapse. The other cop leaped at me, gnashing his broken teeth. He grabbed at my pistol, leaving me with one option. I reached for my plate carrier, drawing my Benchmade knife and stabbing him through the bottom of his mouth, right into his brainstem. Kicking him off, I ran for the door to the outside and put my shoulder into it. Then I realized that it opened inwards, and I swung it open as I sheathed my blade. What hit me was something I didn't expect. A blast of cool air nearly blinded me as I slid and fell. I hit the dirt slopes of a mountain deep in the southeastern region of Afghanistan. I aimed my rifle as I could hear it, the sound being so vivid that I felt like I was 24 again. The distant pops, the rumbling, the high altitude smell. I was on an old road that I remembered. I took off forward, knowing the exact trail. I kept my footing carefully as I didn't want to lose my step, or I would be taking a 3,000-foot trip down fast. Instead, I rounded the corner to a cave entrance. Over a decade ago, it was an old listening and operation post for the Mooj that we had the job of taking out. My first mission as a newly promoted squad leader. I remember staring into that black abyss just as I did now. I marched forward, and for the final time, I found myself falling through the darkness. Then, a set of teeth was grabbing at my jacket sleeve as Zeus pulled me forward, dragging me from a drop-off into the cave onto an old set of stone tiles. I quickly tossed my rifle up as I grabbed the edge, pulling myself up. I took a moment to get my bearings, scratching the dog behind his ear. "Thanks, bud," I said. I used the stock of my rifle to push me back to my feet as I scanned around with my light. An old mausoleum. The sound of tearing and wet splashes could be heard ahead as we both pushed forward. In the central room, with light shining from the morning sun coming through the bars, laid the torn body mass that the Umbra inhabited. The remaining eyes in the fleshy mass looked at us, screaming out as I took aim and fired. The full auto burst punched straight through the center of it as it attempted to reach for us. Zeus grabbed on and bit. Then I stomped down and fired at its arm, tearing it off. As my Malinois took great pleasure in shaking the writhing limb to death, I reached into a dangler pouch on my plate carrier and dumped a bag of salt onto the thing. It crackled and hissed as I lit a match and set it alight. Jacques had a theory that it was an Umbra. No way of telling for sure. So when in doubt, salt and burn it out. I forced open the room's iron gate through generations worth of dirt and grass that had clumped up. Zeus took off as I dropped my mag and loaded a fresh one. Entering the room, I began firing into it. Then I slammed the gate shut as it grabbed at the bars and reached through, screaming more and more as it slowly melted into nothing but char. The last set of eyes met mine as I watched it die. No more souls would be trapped. No more people would be harvested. No more memories were getting replayed like some sick effing remix. With a glorious exhale, I walked away, replacing the burnt, rotting flesh stint in my lungs with crisp forest air. Zeus followed. I set my rifle down on a tree, leaning back as the adrenaline started to wear off and I could feel the freezing amount of sweat that I had after the ordeal. It wasn't perfect, the area still smelt and felt like death, but the suffocating fog of dread had worn off. After a quick look around, I pulled out my radio. November 1 to Maine. Op4 actual is Echo X-ray. So sometimes you've got to persevere. Though let's just say that I'm in no mood to go back to Louisiana anytime soon. Regardless, it was probably the most vivid as whatever it was, Umbra or not, made those blasts from the past straight out of the cerebral theater. It's not something that I'm looking to run back to again, and I told Montgomery as much. But he put it best. We don't have the luxury of choice right now. Not while we're knee-deep in problems and burdened by short-handedness. Though hey, after a few weeks, Zeus got acclimatized very well. What? You thought that I was gonna leave him there? Absolutely not. No, that dog is the reason I'm still around, for better or worse. So the least that I could do was get him out of there. It turns out that yes, he did have fleas. A lot of them. The fumigation of my car and the cleanup was extremely nice, as you could imagine. However, he enjoys the open area of my property. And in the following weeks, I would end up taking him on several more missions. Whatever his senses are, he's able to point out a threat immediately. He's as much of an asset to the small unit that I've got going as he is a friend. Though, well, some mornings, I'll walk outside to grab my paper and bring him in with me. And Zeus will stare out into the fields, his ears pointed up like he's seeing something. Then he'll growl. The first time that he did this, I noticed that the area was silent, just like it had been before. No day gets any easier. Out of the frying pan, well, you know the rest. Anyway, I've gotta go. I've got another target package rolling in now. One that I should be able to update you guys on as soon as I've got caught up on some of the other big stuff. For now, this is Dwight Nolan. I'll see you next time.